It's time to talk about the fifth stroke, which is underwater kicking. If swimmers want to go fast, especially in short course swimming, they've got to be good underwater. While it used to be a nice added bonus, at this point it's basically a necessity. And what's cool is the skill sets required to be effective underwater kicking, and even the body shapes and the body sizes that are rewarded in underwater kicking are a little bit different than what's used on the surface. So for those swimmers that are struggling to be effective on the surface, going underwater can be their secret weapon. And in this video, we're going to go over to the skills that are really important for fast underwater kicking so you can help your swimmers go fast underwater. Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers go faster. There are four main skills that swimmers need to be effective at in order to kick fast underwater. The first is they need to have some point of stability from which they can create undulation. The second is they need to be able to create a lot of propulsion. The third is there needs to be symmetry of the kick. They need to be really good with the up kick as opposed to just the down kick. And they need to be able to kick underwater with great alignment. We're going to start off focusing on stability. If swimmers don't have a point of stability, it's going to be really, really difficult for them to create a wave of undulation, which ultimately results in a lot of propulsion. Now, here's the important part. Here's the nuance. Some swimmers create stability by being really rigid in their hands, their head, and even their upper body, and then undulating from that point, while other swimmers can create stability in their upper body, their head, and their hands while using an undulation motion from that point. The key consideration is that because swimmers are suspended in a fluid, they have to have some stability in order to move from. If they don't have anything, they're just going to be moving all over the place. And I'm sure we've seen swimmers that do have a lot of hand and upper body motion, and it's not coordinated in any way because they're just moving, and they're just moving aimlessly. There needs to be some stability from which the undulation can flow from. However, swimmers have some flexibility in terms of how stiff they are with that point of stability. I find that it's generally more effective to help swimmers feel stability by having them keep things really tight, especially at first. And then as they get more skilled, you can let them open it up and kind of flow through the upper body once they have figured out how to create stability. So let's check it out in action. So our first swimmer here is going to display a lot of stability in the upper body. You can see that the hands, the head, the arms aren't moving around a little bit. You can see that they definitely do have a little bit of wave to it, but there's a lot of control there. So that little bit of movement allows for that wave to get bigger and bigger, but it all comes from a point of stability in the hands and the upper body. This is in stark contrast to swimmers that are just moving back and forth and their upper body and their hands are moving all over the place. When that happens, it's going to be really difficult for them to undulate and to undulate effectively. You can see another swimmer here. He's really rigid, he's really tight, and that's going to create stability, which is going to allow him to have a really effective kick and allow him to let that wave of undulation travel down through the feet and then really create a lot of propulsion when he finally kicks at the end of the stroke cycle. If his hands are moving all over the place, it's going to be really difficult for him to maintain both that kick tempo and maintain an effective kick tempo that allows him to create a lot of propulsion. One more example here, you can see that there's pretty good stability from the upper body. There's a little bit of motion, and that motion gets magnified as it travels down his body. It's by creating some stability up top that allows him to get more and more range of motion and really whip through the entire kick and to create a lot of speed at the end of each kick. So we'll take a look at another swimmer here, and in this case, there is more undulation in the upper body. There's more movement in the upper body. However, it's moving in a wave rhythm as opposed to just moving back and forth. And so what's key is that swimmers learn how to create some stability and then wave from that stability. And then once they have that skill, they can get more range of motion. They can get more movement in it, and that's perfectly fine. That's totally different than just moving the hands, the upper body in a haphazard manner. While this swimmer does have more range of motion than the previous swimmers, he still has total control of this range of motion, and he's using it to undulate rather than just move around. And so that's a key distinction between those two different types. Either are perfectly acceptable. These have all been really fast swimmers that we're watching. What's different is that there's some stability, and you can see the wave gets bigger and bigger as they go, and the only way that's going to happen is that there has to be some control over what's happening with the hands and the upper body. And then the wave can get created there, and then it can get magnified depending on how much the swimmer moves the upper body and how much they move the lower body throughout the rest of the kick. So when swimmers are struggling with their underwater kick, I almost always look to stability first to figure out what's going wrong. In a lot of cases, they don't know how to create a wave of undulation. They just kind of kick. And the reason they don't know how to create a wave of undulation is they can't create any stability in the upper body, the head, or the hands from which they can create that wave of undulation. So for me, the first step is always trying to help them learn how to be more rigid with the upper body. And once they can figure out how to create a wave from that point of stability, that point of rigidity, then I let them kind of open things up and figure out how much range of motion they need to have through the hands, through the upper body to kick effectively. But already have a swimmer that's really good underwater and they have more range of motion in the upper body, they already get this concept. You might have them play with it just a little bit, but you never really want to restrict that upper body range of motion because they're using it well and they're using it to create speed. If swimmers want to create speed in any stroke, they have to create a lot of propulsion. That's certainly true of underwater kicking, just like it is when swimming on the surface. However, swimmers are going to have to use a little bit different strategies because they can only use the legs rather than the arms. Regardless, the principles are the same. I'm going to show you exactly how elite underwater kickers create a lot of propulsion with their kicking. To create speed underwater, swimmers have to use as big a surface area as they can. They want to kick through as long a range of motion as possible. And finally, they want to execute with building leg speed throughout each kick. If swimmers can execute those three key skills, they're going to create a lot of propulsion underwater, which is going to help them go fast underwater. So let's check it out and see how elite swimmers are creating a lot of propulsion underwater by using a large surface area, using that surface area for a long range of motion, and by accelerating foot speed. First things first, swimmers have to use their entire foot and as much of their lower leg to move water as possible. If they can't get everything moving backwards and they can't orient the leg backwards, they're going to struggle to create a big surface area to move water with. And obviously, the feet aren't going to be as effective as the arms at creating propulsion with each kick. However, the more effective they can be by creating a bigger surface area, the faster swimmers are going to be able to go. So if we watch this swimmer here on the right, you can see as she sets it up right there, you can see how the ankles are bending backwards. They're facing backwards, and she's going to use that whole foot and some of her lower leg to create propulsion. You can see that they stay backwards, and she's going to fling that water backwards with that kick. So if we watch with the next kick, it's going to be the same thing. That whole lower leg is facing backwards, and the swimmer is going to flick water backwards. And so with each kick, as big as possible, given the constraints of human anatomy, and then using that to kick water backwards to help her go forwards. So big surface area, the feet are pointed backwards, and that's creating a lot of propulsion because she's getting more water with each kick. So next up, it's a matter of range of motion. And so if we watch here, so the feet are going to start moving water backwards from here, and they're going to move water backwards all the way through so you can see the foot flick through right there. And so that's a pretty big range of motion from here all the way through to there. If the swimmer stopped the kick short right there, they're not going to get as much as if they kick all the way through. And likewise, if they don't set it up early, they're not going to get as much of a kick as well. And so making sure that the swimmer kicks all the way through is really important. And if you can see here, her feet, her legs are in front of her hips, and that's going to indicate that she's used a really large range of motion, which means she's going to get as much out of each kick as possible. So setting up a big surface area and then holding that surface area all the way through the kick is going to be really important. So the next key skill is accelerating the feet. So there's not a whole lot of speed here, and then boom, it happens really fast. She really gets the feet moving forward and gets the feet moving forward in front of the body. So patience with the kick, relatively speaking, and then boom, there's an acceleration at the end of the kick. So the three key elements are big surface area. You can see the feet are oriented backwards there. Big range of motion. She kicks all the way through right there. And then as she kicks right there, there's an acceleration of the kick. There's an acceleration of the feet towards the end of the kick cycle. So three really important skills, and they all add up to more propulsion. So we'll take a look at another swimmer here, and we'll see the same dynamics. So as he sets up the kick right here, you can see that whole leg, that whole lower leg is facing backwards. And then as he really gets the kick rolling, you can see the feet and the ankles really start to bend backwards so that the feet can move water backwards for as long as possible. And so again, really great surface area right there. The whole foot is facing backwards, and that's going to create a ton of propulsion. You can see it again with the setup here. The whole leg is in position to create propulsion, and then the whole foot is really going to be used to create a lot of propulsion. So big surface area means more propulsion for each kick. But it's not just about the surface area, it's about the range of motion. And we see there, the swimmer is going to kick through and the feet are going to come through the center line of the body. And that's going to create a lot more propulsion because the swimmer is able to use a more effective range of motion. So again, the feet end up way in front of the body. They create a lot of propulsion because he's using a full range of motion and he's holding that effective kick, creating a lot of pressure, a lot of propulsion with each kick, and then keeping that rolling through the entire kick. So big range of motion is really important as well. And then lastly, there's going to be an acceleration of the kick as the feet come through. So right there, the foot speed really picks up. The second half of the kick, there's patience, and then boom, there's an acceleration, patience, and then there's an acceleration. And so with that kick through the accelerating foot, they're creating more pressure on the water, which means more speed and more propulsion with each kick. So by creating a big surface area, using that surface area for a long range of motion, and then accelerating throughout that surface area, there's going to be a lot of pressure moving water backwards through a long range of motion. And that's ultimately going to result in a lot of propulsion, which means more speed. One more example here, and we see here, the foot is facing backwards there, is kicking through, and that's going to create a big surface area to kick with. So right there, that foot is facing backwards as much as possible, and then he's kicking all the way through. And so again, big surface area is going to create a lot more propulsion. And with this swimmer, he's also doing a really good job of kicking with a full range of motion. So the kick really starts in earnest here, and he's kicking all the way through with the feet well in front of his body, creating a lot of propulsion over a big range of motion. So setting it up back here, and then kicking all the way through and creating a lot of propulsion because there's such a big range of motion. Now, if we watch the acceleration, patience, and then boom, the legs really snap through the end of the kick, and that acceleration is going to help the swimmer create more pressure on the water and create more propulsion. And so just like our other underwater kickers, it's big surface area, it's big range of motion, and it's accelerating foot speed. If swimmers can execute those three skills, they're going to create a lot of propulsion. The down kick gets all the love in underwater kicking. However, that doesn't mean the up kick isn't just as important as the down kick. If swimmers aren't optimizing their down kick and their up kick, they're going to be compromising their ability to go fast underwater. I'm going to show you the key skills of the up kick and why having an effective up kick is so important for fast underwater kicking. In fact, the symmetry of the kick and the ability to maintain foot speed and range of motion in both directions is one of the factors that has consistently been shown to separate faster and slower underwater kickers. So the up kick is really, really important. And if we want to help swimmers improve their up kick, we have to help them understand what it is and why it matters. And that's what we're going to accomplish in this video. When it comes down to it, there are two key skills that swimmers have to master. One is they have to make sure that the foot speed is really good on the up kick, just like it is on the down kick. And the second is they have to recover the legs relatively straight as opposed to just bending at the knee to get the feet back behind the body. If swimmers can master those two key skills, they're going to have a much more effective up kick, which means they're going to be a lot faster underwater. Let's check it out. So the first thing we're going to pay attention to is how the legs recover. So if you watch here, there's the end of the kick. The leg is going to recover straight. And the only time the knee starts to bend is when the thigh itself is starting to move forwards again. So it's not that the knee is ever bent consciously. It only bends because the leg is starting to reverse and the knee is starting to come forward. So if we watch here, again, straight legs on the recovery. Now he's starting to kick down with his thigh, and that's what bends the knee and allows the feet to move up a little bit higher. So again, straight leg, and then it bends because the next kick starts. Now, why does that matter? What it does is it allows the whole leg to move up, and then when he starts to kick down, he reverses that, and that snap back creates a really powerful kicking motion. So again, straight leg recovery, and then it reverses, and that reversal really accelerates the feet, and that snap through at the bottom right there is what creates a ton of propulsion. However, it's set up by having that straight leg recovery, the quick reversal of the thigh, the feet are moving in the opposite direction, but then they get whipped back down, which creates a lot of foot speed and a lot of propulsion. So it's that straight leg recovery that really sets everything up and creates a situation where swimmers can create a ton of propulsion on their actual down kick. The other aspect of it is foot speed. And so if we watch here, the feet are moving fast in both directions. And that's important for two reasons. One, the longer they take with the up kick, the longer it is until they can execute another effective down kick. And secondly, the faster the legs move up, when they're snapped back down and reversed, that's going to create a much more powerful whipping action, which is going to create a lot more propulsion when the legs reverse and then also through the kick itself. And that's going to create a lot more propulsion both at the time of reversal and when the feet whip back down through the down kick. So fast tempo with the up kick is really important for improving the overall rate, and it increases the impact of the down kick because there's a much bigger snap with the reversal of the feet. So if swimmers want to have an effective up kick, they have to execute that kick relatively straight, and they need to do it fast. If they're missing one or both of those components, it's going to be a lot more difficult to create an effective kick. Now let's take a look at a swimmer working on her back and also with a little bit different skills. So if we watch here, the kick recovery is right there, going to be straight. So she's recovering straight, and then when she starts to kick again, that's when the knees start to bend and you get that whip through the kick. And you can really see that here. So the recovery is straight here, then she reverses the knees, and then the whip comes through, and that creates a lot of propulsion. So compared to the last swimmer, she's got a much faster tempo in both directions and a much tighter kick. However, she's still executing the same basic skills. The recovery of the legs is straight there, and the tempo is fast in both directions. There's probably equal tempo here. The feet are moving really fast in both directions, and that's creating a ton of speed. So again, straight leg recovery, the knee bends when she starts to bring the knee forward to kick, and it's straight before that, and that reversal creates a huge whipping action, which allows her to create a ton of propulsion. So really fast tempo, straight leg on the recovery, a quick reversal, and that's a real recipe for a lot of propulsion. So ultimately, the up kick is really simple. Swimmers have to execute two really key skills. They need to keep the legs straight. They need to keep the tempo up, and if they can manage both of those, they're going to create a ton of speed underwater. All the stability, propulsion, and symmetry in the world isn't going to do swimmers much good underwater if their alignment isn't in check. Poor alignment is like swimming with the brakes on, and no matter how big the engine is, if the brakes are on, swimmers are always going to be limited in the amount of speed that they can create. We're going to continue to talk about underwater kicking, more specifically, alignment in underwater kicking. In swimming, there's two components to speed. The first is creating a ton of propulsion, and the second is creating as little resistance as possible. And one of the reasons that underwater kicking is so fast is because swimmers are under the surface and they're able to create a lot less resistance because they have much better alignment than they otherwise would on the surface. However, if they're not doing everything they can to optimize their alignment when they're underwater, they're going to create a lot more resistance than they otherwise have to, and that's going to limit how fast they can go. And minimizing alignment underwater comes down to three key skills. First, they have to be in control of what's happening at the top of their body. Secondly, they have to be using an amount of amplitude that's appropriate and effective for them. And third, they have to be able to keep the spine relatively straight as they move through the water, even when they're undulating. If they're moving through the water with a big arch in their back, that's like putting on the brakes. So first skill we're going to take a look at is controlling the upper body. And so while there's range of motion here, there's some movement here, it's controlled. And there are some swimmers that have a bigger undulation to that, but even then, those swimmers are controlling that amount of undulation rather than just moving the arms all over the place. If the upper body is moving unnecessarily and unproductively, that means they're going to create a lot more resistance than they otherwise need to. So having some control over what happens up top is the start of maintaining really great alignment underwater. The second key skill is finding an appropriate amount of undulation. The more undulation, the more amplitude there is, the more drag there is, but with more undulation, more amplitude. But with more undulation and more amplitude, there's also the possibility and potential for creating more propulsion. So what swimmers have to do is figure out what's best for them in terms of how much amplitude, how much undulation to maximize propulsion while minimizing resistance. And that can be a tough thing to figure out. However, it's the principle that really matters. So swimmers want to undulate to create as much propulsion as they can, but they want to minimize that undulation to limit the amount of resistance they create as they move through the water. The next thing to look for is see how the spine is relatively straight. So while there's undulation happening, the spine returns to a relatively straight position here with each undulation and each kick. If the swimmer was arched as they were moving through the water, they'd create a ton more resistance. And even if they undulate from that position, they're still in an arched position, which means more resistance and less speed. So keeping that spine in a relatively neutral position and then undulating around that neutral position is what swimmers are really looking for. The better they can do that, the less resistance they'll create and the faster they're going to go. So we'll take a look at another swimmer here. It's the same idea. The upper body is relatively controlled. There's enough amplitude to create a lot of propulsion, but there's not unnecessary amplitude. And the most important thing probably is watch how his spine is relatively neutral as he's moving through. So he's moving up and down with his undulation, but he's not arching the back. He's not exaggerating the spinal position. It's staying relatively neutral, even though that wave is traveling down through the body. So he's maintaining a really great posture, a really great alignment, and that allows him to minimize the resistance that he's creating, which allows him to maximize the speed he's creating. So this swimmer here has a little bit more range of motion through the kick, but as you can see, his spine gets back to neutral every time. He's not using too much amplitude. He's still managing a pretty streamlined position, and the upper body, while moving more, is still under control. It's not moving around haphazardly. It's not all over the place. And so again, there's a different kicking style here than the previous two swimmers, but the same principles apply. He's got relatively stable up top. He's moving around, but he's doing so to create undulation, and he's doing so in control. And while there's more range of motion throughout the entire kick, it's still within a reasonable amount. He's not moving excessively because he's still able to keep a pretty high tempo. And he's keeping everything in line with his spine. He's undulating back and forth, but he's getting to neutral and he's staying in neutral with each kick cycle. And that's what's key here is there's more range of motion, but he's still doing it around a relatively straight spine, and he gets back into that position with every kick, which is going to minimize the amount of resistance he creates, which allows him to create more speed for the same kicking level and the same kicking effort and the same effectiveness of his kicks. So improving alignment is key for fast underwater kicking speed. However, it's a much more nuanced skill as compared to the other important skills with underwater kicking. Swimmers have to manage their alignment by optimizing the amount of undulation that they create, and they have to be in a relatively neutral spinal position as opposed to an extremely arched position. Those two skills are something that a lot of swimmers struggle with, and as a result, even if they can kick relatively effectively, they're going to struggle to create speed underwater. However, if you can help swimmers improve those skills, their ability to go fast underwater is going to be dramatically improved, and that means they're going to be able to race a lot faster. For more about one of my favorite strategies to help swimmers improve their alignment in any stroke, check out the video below.